with their finest hour.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of Insight Politics, one of the only shows on politics that considers spin a four-letter word. My name is Bob Beatty. Mark Peterson will join me later, and we come to you from the lovely campus that is Washburn University. Today we are going to look at the state legislator. There are a number of issues that will affect the lives of Kansans in ways to be determined by the actions taken by our state legislative representatives. Our program is not, however, about sin taxes, school financing, or flag education programs. All questions the legislature has or will address this year. Instead, we want to visit with a Kansas legislator about something that you might not even have thought about. What is it that a legislator does? What do they do down there in the State House on any given day? We're going to try to offer insight into this question by talking with Kansas State Representative Annie Kuether. Representative Kuether is well known to the Washburn community as her family lives near the Washburn campus. Her husband John was a professor of law at Washburn from 1974 until his death in 1999, and she represents District 55, which includes the Washburn campus and the neighboring area. Representative Kuether has served as a member of the Kansas House since 1996, and just as importantly, as noted in her campaign literature, she was the leader of Girl Scout Troop number 137. Welcome, Representative Kuether, to Inside Politics.
Thank you.
First, I wanted to ask you, how did you decide to get involved in legislative politics?
Primarily, after staying home with my children for 13 years, I went to work for Representative then Kathleen Sebelius and was her administrative assistant for 4 years, and sort of, I guess, just caught the bug.
Was there some sort of key point or item that made you decide to run for office, or was it a long-term decision?
Well, the 4 years leading up to when I decided to run in 1994, which is the first time I ran, it was dealing with the issues that Kathleen worked on, women's health issues and things like that, education that I was concerned about. Did
you get any advice from some people that said, don't run? Or any pros and cons, or people out there?
I got some good support. It was a sort of an awakening for my family because they were used to having me around a lot. But everybody in general was supportive.
And how did you campaign? Is there a factor in campaigning that every state legislator probably has to consider?
Well, I don't know that I really focus that much on anybody else. I know as a representative with a D for Democrat behind my name, I know I have to work very hard, and that means going out and knocking on doors.
Okay, so that's an important factor.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Are there particular issues or interests in which you focus on?
Well, when I ran the first time, I lost my first election actually, and then ran again in 1996 and won. And I think for most women, when they first start getting into this process, they focus on education and children's issues and that sort of thing. And that's what I did as well. It's what happens when you get elected and get assigned your committee work that sort of ends up driving where you focus your time.
Oh, okay. I wanted to ask you, in terms of what you want to accomplish in the legislature, how much time do you actually have to pursue what you want to accomplish?
At this point, the way the committee assignments are set up, we're busy. We're really busy. I work on 4 committees, which doesn't leave a lot of time to do anything but go to the committee, do the floor work on the House, go back to committee in the afternoon. So it's very hard that if you're not working on a committee that is a particular interest of yours, to really have anything on the outside to be able to do. I'm also the Shawnee County Legislative Delegation Chair, so I have to oversee what the entire delegation is doing, Democrat and Republican, and keeping us focused on issues that are important to Shawnee County and our areas. And so you sort of feel like a little piece is going here and there sometimes, but it's challenging.
Is there anything different than what you expected before you ran, or you find yourself spending more time on something you didn't think you would, or is it what you expected?
Well, I'm not sure that it is that different because I was working with Kathleen. But I think what I would find is where my areas of expertise have grown to be, and that surprises me because it wasn't in any area that I thought I would land in.
Interesting. We were wondering if you could tell our viewers what a typical legislative day is like in the Kansas legislature.
The day begins with an agenda meeting. The Democrats meet for a caucus, and so do the Republicans in separate rooms. And what we do in the caucus is we go over the bills that we were going to be working on the floor that day. Generally, in our caucus, what happens is the ranking Democrat on every committee gets up and says what and covers the bills that are going to be coming down on the committees they serve. So we do that, then we go to our 9 a.m. committee meeting, and after that ends, 2 hours later, we're usually on the floor at about 11 o'clock in the morning. We're there given the beginning of the session for maybe 10 minutes, and towards turnaround time, halfway time, which we just passed, I think we worked something like 28 bills one day. So we were there for hours. And then after that, after the noon hour, we have our 1:30 committee meeting and our 3:30 committee meeting.
And in these committee meetings, you have people that present testimony or facts and figures, and are you call people in, or people request to be in, or how do the committee meetings work?
The chair and the vice chair and the ranking Democrat work to create their calendars and what bills they choose to hear. Obviously, the chair and the vice chair are the ones that determine that the most. But they're the ones that determine what bills that are going to be that are assigned to our committees, or which ones we're going to hear and work. And it is up to them to put that out in the legislative calendar so people know what's coming up. And generally, they either call or people call in to be a proponent or an opponent, and that's who we hear from.
Do you have situations where you've seen a bill and possibly formed an opinion upon it, and then hold the committee hearings, hear testimony, and change your mind, or maybe even reverse how you've thought about the entire bill?
Sometimes that happens. Generally, the way that happens, though, is when we are hearing about a bill and then working it, and that's when the opportunity comes for amendments, and we can maybe try to make some changes that we feel might make the bill a little bit better. There are some bills that come before me that I just don't like, sure.
If that's the case and you're in that committee, can you call somebody in, or can you ask someone that could press the point in the opposite direction?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I would just have to let the chair know that I'd like that person to sign up and speak, and they'd have that opportunity.
Okay. And do you enjoy committee meetings, or just
Generally. Some are more stimulating than others, obviously. But my 9 o'clock committee meeting is an area that I never thought I would work in, and that's utilities. And obviously with the difficulties we've been having this winter, it's been a pretty interesting place to be.
Let me ask you this. There's a number of committees you're on. There's a number of bills being considered. Who do you depend on for information about all these matters? Do you have staff, or do you have to do it all yourself? Do you spend all night, reading up? It seems like a lot of information to process.
It is. You can't read every piece of legislation that comes your way, so you do need to rely on somebody else, and that's where the ranking Democrat tends to be your information giver. Certainly, if you want, I can go to anybody to talk to about any piece of legislation. I've been in the Speaker's office when we were discussing something that I really wanted to know what his thoughts were on a very big piece of legislation, Can Ed. So it just depends on what you want to do. I think I can sort of safely say, with not working in that arena, I was probably one of the few people that read the Corporate Hog Farm bill page to page, which was about this thick. Just thought it was an area I didn't really know anything about, and I didn't want anything to slip up on me. So I did read that and had a lot of questions.
That could be a campaign slogan.
Well, I don't think I want to go there.
The reason I ask is in Washington, D.C., sometimes you meet with representatives or senators, and they're told, we have a committee meeting, and he says, oh, and then they hand that person, and this is what you're going to talk about, and this is how you probably are going to vote. Yeah. Do you have staff? Obviously, it's a different arena. Do you have staff that help you out, or not?
And I think this is one of the most unknown factors of being a state legislator. I have a secretary that's assigned to me during the legislation period. The legislature, 90 days, that's it. The rest is up to me.
Really? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Throughout the year.
Well, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll seek out more insight into legislative life from Representative Annie Kuether of the Kansas State Legislature.
It doesn't matter who you are, or what you drive, or where you live. You have the power to give someone the greatest gift in the world, life. Talk to your family about organ donation. Talk to your family about donating life.
Edgar Degas had eye problems most of his life. Claude Monet had cataracts, yet he continued to paint. And even after Georgia O'Keeffe's vision was permanently impaired, she went on to create masterpieces. These artists did not give up because they had trouble seeing. They just made the best of what vision they had. So can you. Call for a free booklet that will show you how. 1-877-569-8474.
Welcome back to Insight Politics. I've been talking with Representative Annie Kuether of the Kansas State Legislature. I wanted to ask you, what do you find the most satisfying aspect of your work? And you mentioned developing some expertise in areas you might not have thought you would have.
I would think for me the most satisfying aspect of the job is being able to help people when they call with concerns. That's certainly something that, you know, on any given day, most people don't have a chance to do. So I would say that's probably my most satisfying part of the job. The other part that I really like, and this is sort of something that I attribute to my husband, who used to teach at Washburn Law School, and that's was he said, where else do you get to go to learn something new every day? And I have the same opportunity working at the Kansas Legislature to continue to learn all the time, and I find that challenging, and consequently my committee assignments got me there. I work on the Utilities Committee in the morning at 9 o'clock, so I know much more about gas, electricity, oil, wind turbines and things like that than I ever thought I would ever know. Also, I have worked in the area of economic development that gets me into a field of taxes on a fairly regular basis, which is certainly not anything I anticipated working along those lines. So I would say probably the challenge of figuring out, getting a fix on the utilities has been the hardest work, and which is why I continue to serve on that committee by request.
And have you been able to also continue with what you said were early interests in education and other matters?
Yes, I've served, the last 2 years I served on the Education Budget Subcommittee for all of education, which is where they came and did their requests for appropriations. So I did all of higher education and K through 12, school for the hearing, the deaf, and the blind, and humanities and the arts. So it's, you know, a whole gamut of different issues, which was fascinating. I've also had the opportunity this year to work simply on higher education, which of course, you know, serving Washburn, I am, you know, always delighted to be able to be in a position to serve and do what I can to make sure they're on the right page.
I think this discussion leads to the question about representation, because you mentioned that you could get into the legislature and maybe do things you hadn't planned on doing initially. That may even be different than the people who voted you in thought they were getting in a legislator. So let me ask about representation. You're elected by voters in your district. How much do you hear from them? How do you talk to them about what's you're working on? And do you see yourself as making decisions independently or as sort of following the people who voted for you or your entire district?
Those are a lot of questions.
Yes, they are.
After I have been able to win an election, I would say probably the first 2 years that I served, I heard from constituents on a regular basis, expressing their opinions, and that's great. I mean, that's the job. I also do newsletters. Usually I like to get one out at the end of each month. I just actually sent one out yesterday for February. Every other year I send a a district-wide survey out to all my constituents that I pay for and pay for the return so that they don't have to, so I'm pretty much guaranteed I'll hear back from them. I also, the last couple of years, and actually tomorrow morning at 10:30 I'm having a coffee with Nancy Kirk, and we've sent out notices in the newspaper that we will be available, and people can just come in and visit with us and complain or talk about whatever issue they care about. So I think my constituents at this point know me, they're comfortable with me. If they want to give me some information about an issue, they will. But when it comes to voting independently, they know that I'm going to have to do that on some occasions, and I think they're comfortable with me enough at this point that they trust me.
There's, of course, always the trade-off in that you want to be reelected if you want to stay in the legislature and do the things you want to do. But there can be issues that you know may be problematic.
Sure.
Do you sometimes think about reelection when certain things come up, or not, I guess is the question on that.
Well, I think at this point, for somebody in my shoes, I pretty much understand how my constituents feel about the major issues that could be divisive. Concealed carry, some others that, not everybody can agree on. And I know that I only get one vote and that it's not going to make everybody happy. But I think I have a pretty good understanding with my communication with my constituents which way the bulk of them would like me to go. And quite honestly, there is a part that says, you put me here and you can take me out. That's what this is all about.
And if an issue came up that maybe constituents didn't agree to, you could vote for it and then say, I'm going to explain it to you, why I did what I did, or...
And I've done that.
Okay.
I've done that. As a matter of fact, my first newsletter, there was an issue, again, that I couldn't please everybody, but in this very tight economic time, I couldn't feel that I could vote for it, and I dealt with it in my letters.
Okay. There are some politicians that don't do that. That's why we ask. I like to talk about lobbyists, and the public has a perception that can be negative. In our political science classes, we tend to teach that it's part of pluralism, lobbying. So I'd like to ask you, what's your impression of lobbying and lobbyists, and are they good for state legislators? And what purpose do they serve?
Well, that sort of ties back into that question, who do you go to get your answers? And quite often, lobbyists are there to answer your questions. I mean, they are there to answer your questions, and they are extremely helpful. Those that have been around for a long time know that if they make one mistake, one lie, one misstep or miscalculation, with most of us, that they'll never get in the office again. They give us information that obviously, we can't get to all of the time with the kind of days that we have. So I will call a lobbyist occasionally and say, would you please come explain your point of view? We have a very difficult piece of legislation again this year. It's the second time it's been back before us, between dental hygienists and the dentists, and it's a tough issue, and you can't please everybody, but it deals with a lot of concerns, and you can have one side of lobbyists come in and explain their view, and you go, gosh, that's right, and then there's the other guys come in and say, well, this is where we're coming from. That's right. So, I mean, it is hard, but if lobbyists are doing their job and doing it right, they're invaluable.
What about when you get one lobbyist for one side and there isn't one for another, then you have to go seek out or find the other side? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the negative connotation comes when politicians don't do that.
Well, I always try to just focus on what I do, and there are a lot of people in this city that I can call that can help. I have Washburn University with a lot of different areas of expertise I can tap into. So, I mean, I really do feel that in areas that I work in that I have a lot of balance.
So you would say generally lobbyists serve a very, very useful purpose with your work?
Yes.
Okay. Your party affiliation is Democrat?
Yes.
Okay. The Republicans dominate the state House and Senate. Does this disparity in partisan strength significantly affect your ability to accomplish the things you might want to accomplish sometimes?
Sometimes, sure, because we can't set the agenda. Sometimes our agenda is a little bit different than the Republicans. So that gets frustrating, not being able to set the agenda and drive it on a regular basis. However, I think anybody that's read about our Kansas legislature knows that the Republican Party isn't always on the same page. Its members aren't always on the same page, and quite often we can get to work with a group of Republicans that can give us bigger numbers, and certainly we can sway issues. In the 1999 legislative session, we had a huge impact and developed and drove a lot of issues that we dealt with that year. So it's healthy. It's great to have a two-party system. It's great to have 2 points of view. It would be pretty sad if we only had one.
Is there any frustration you get from being in the minority?
Sure. I mean, who doesn't want to be in charge? It's more fun.
It's more fun. Oh, that's good. For the benefit of our viewers, is there a particular misconception or misunderstanding that the public may possess about the legislature, elected officials, or the job you do that you might want to mention?
Oh, that's tough. I mean, that's really hard because I think probably the number one issue is that we're getting paid a gazillion dollars for this job that we do. And I mean, you sit here and we're surprised to find out that we don't have any staff to speak of. And those of us that live in Topeka pretty much are on call 24 hours a day. People will call us at home. We take our calls at home. We're on call 24 hours a day. That doesn't play out exactly the same way when you move away from the city. But I think that we work hard, and we try to do our best job. And we really don't earn a lot of money, and that's not why I went to work for the legislature, but it's very difficult for those that drive 6 hours one way every week to get here and then go home to speak with their constituencies. So I think that's frustrating, and I also think it's difficult to change that belief because of the way things are written up in the newspapers.
So you think, I was going to ask, where do you think this comes from?
Yeah, well...
And you think it's from the media?
Well, I do. Some of it, I mean, when there hasn't been a raise, I think, for, 18 years at the state legislature for those who serve. And, there are a lot of changes that have happened in between now and then, but a lot of these people that come up and serve are still paying the bills for their families and children at home. They still have to pay their high gas bills at home, and they have to pay for something to live in here. So I think sometimes that gets lost because if you talk about making any kind of increase, they say, oh, it's a 62% or 90% increase over this. I mean, you can move numbers around any way you want.
I guess what I'm asking is, why do you think a large number of people, their opinion would be, they don't deserve much money, or even the worst is, well, they're all a bunch of crooks. So that sort of attitude. Yeah. Where does that come from? Or do you have any sort of idea in your experience?
I hate to say that, even touch the word crook. I just think it's driven by what they read sometimes, and certainly there are occasions that there are bad pennies that come through. Can't be perfect, but I think if anybody in this state keeps in touch with their state legislators, I think they'll be delightfully pleased. We're good, regular folk. We do the same kind of jobs. We get up the same morning, have our children, take care of them, and what we do is we put our name on the ballot, and we care, and we go out and fight for those things we care about.
Now the problem of you saying this is now you're going to get more phone calls at home.
Probably. That's okay.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and offering further insight about the job of a state legislator. We'll be right back with Mark Peterson for some closing remarks.
What if you had to choose between a flower and an elephant? What would you choose? What if you had to decide between a 100-year-old tree and a 1,000,000-year-old beach? Could you choose between drinking clean water or breathing clean air? Now you can choose all these things. EarthShare, the world's leading environmental groups working together, It's one choice we can all live with.
Welcome back to Insight Politics. Joining me now for further insight is Mark Peterson, a man whose passion for politics is evidenced by the fact that he named his 3 cats Adlai, Spiro, and General LeMay. Mark, it's nice to see you again.
It's good to be here, Bob, and my cats appreciate the plug.
I was wondering if there was anything that Representative Kuether said that might have surprised you.
I guess the thing that surprised me about Representative Kuether's comments today, Bob, was that they sound so much like what we teach in American government, state and local politics. And I sometimes get the impression from my students that they don't believe for a moment that legislators actually work that hard, that there isn't all sorts of graft and corruption, and that they aren't all getting fabulously wealthy at the public trough. I also was struck by the amount of work that the good representative and her colleagues have to do on their own in the absence of any sort of professional staff. It's a far cry from the sort of environment that a member of Congress or the U.S. Senate experiences.
You mentioned our classes. Is there anything Representative Kuether said that reminds you of representational theory?
As a matter of fact, there is. For all of my students who might be watching, I'd remind them of the work of Edmund Burke, who was a British parliamentarian at the end of the 18th century, known in American history for being a great friend of the American colonists. But Burke was a man who believed in the concept of representation as being a trust between himself and his constituents. And Burke believed that the reason that he had been hired by the people to do the job was to use his best judgment. And he always noted that at the time that the public felt that his judgment was no longer their best judgment, they had the right to vote him from office. And I heard the echo of those words loud and clear in Representative Kuether's comments.
And that's exactly what she did say. She said she thinks that in certain cases, she says, you have the right to not elect me next time.
You put me in, you can take me out, I think is how she put it.
And yet we seem to forget that, or at least some voters seem to forget that.
By the way, I've been instructed by the folks around here to put a plug in tonight as well, and that is that if you like watching Insight Politics, you probably have some appetite for public affairs, and so make sure you tune in for Washburn Edition on every Thursday evening at 6 p.m. on this same cable channel.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. That's all the time and insight we have for today. For Mark Peterson and everybody here at Insight Politics, thanks for tuning in. It's time for us to go.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
But as president, I must put the interests of America first.
To send a new signal of openness to the world by tearing down that wall.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.